Chris McMahon may be the most thoughtful human in advertising. Everything about him, from his presence and demeanor to the way he connects the dots between each facet of his life to develop and hone his approach to leadership, is inspiring and illuminating. Now, if you've spent more than a minute in advertising, you know that for every Chris, there are at least a few hundred not Chris's. One of the reasons I became a coach was to help folks find their inner Chris. And you can get a head start on that work right now by listening to this episode of the DesuckifyWork Podcast. Some Chris-isms that you'll hear during our conversation: passion is sexy. Encouraging and making space for authentic passion and vulnerability is important for great creative work. Our best tool in this pursuit has been the creative team. We shouldn't abandon it in the face of new tech and evolving roles. We should lean into it and fortify it. Being a swim coach makes you a better leader. You learn to meet people where they are, incrementally raising standards to help them grow into who they can be. We are woefully inefficient at matching talent to open roles or projects. Case in point, LinkedIn cattle calls. They're great for activating our biases and toying with creatives' emotions, but terrible at actually finding the best person for the job. The fix? Agencies need to stop treating talent as overhead and start seeing it as an appreciating asset to nurture. We'll continue to see our best and brightest leave the industry if we don't fix this issue. I think Chris is a top talent and exactly the kind of creative leader we need more of. I think you'll feel the same after taking a listen. All right, Chris McMahon, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Happy to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to have you here. Great to see you, and looking forward to diving into some good stuff. I'd love to give everyone a chance to kind of get to know you before we start digging into stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do for work, and how you came to be doing it?
Sure. So currently I am a creative director, and currently I'm the senior creative lead at Bunsen here in Nashville. Before that, I've worked all over the place. I've worked for BBDO New York, Crispin Porter, Dentsu, and Campbell Ewald. So been all over the place, touching tons of different pieces. I've got to make a lot of work that I think is really interesting in terms of making ads is great, but also stuff that people talk about or share, or just you're like, whoa, what the hell was that? That's my favorite kind of work. But yeah, I guess in terms of getting to this point, I feel like I had a knack for I always had a knack for writing, and I had a knack for it in high school. I did, I don't know if people are familiar with DECA. It's like a competitive marketing club for high school and college students. And okay. I did that because that's like advertising, not realizing at the time how much more was going on in marketing. But I did the advertising campaign event. I did it solo, which I didn't know you weren't supposed to do. I thought you're supposed to just do the whole thing. And I was a national finalist for that twice. And I was like, well, damn, maybe I do have a thing for this.
Nice.
And then when I got to college to study, I was like, I want to do this. I got to college, and someone said, you can get a job just doing the fun part of this, right? Where you write the words and the scripts and think of stuff. And I was like, oh, that sounds way easier than doing that and media placement and strategy and everything else. Yeah, let's do that. So
awesome.
I went to the creative circus after college, put together a book that I felt good enough, and that was how I started my first work at CPB.
Nice. Yeah. I'm a little jealous that you started figuring out that you liked advertising all the way back in high school. I think I was after college is when I finally realized that's a real job. You can go just do stuff like that.
It's a kind of a weird secret. And I totally lucked into it. I didn't know, no one I knew did this kind of work. Again, I was just a kid who liked writing, but I figured I would have to get a real job doing science or research. I grew up in a town full of engineers, so I figured that would be what I would do. And I totally lucked into the idea that this was something that I could put creative talent against. It's part of why I spend right now I do volunteer work with the Workshop, which is a free program for creatives trying to kind of find their thing. And I teach at Denver Ad School, and a lot of that is because there was not a lot of obvious pathways into this. It was kind of like kind of guard a secret. And I was like, if I think more people knew that you could get a job being like a writer or an artist, but have like dental insurance at the same time, a lot of people would be interested in this. And
Yes.
so it's important to me to kind of be part of that pathway to be like, hey, like there's a whole stable career here where you can hone your craft, get paid for it, and meet people who you're as passionate as you about this and like make
Mhm.
stuff with them.
Yeah, I like that. I think it is kind of remarkable how bad of a job the advertising industry has generally done about letting itself be known.
Yep.
Like people are dreaming about all kinds of careers when they're growing up, and advertising is somewhere way off in the background or just blind. Like I think I always equated it with like in my mind it was almost like going to work for like writing for TV or something. Like it was just like so far out there, like it wasn't a real job, like it wasn't a
Right.
thing you could actually get. So I think that's awesome that you're kind of like putting it, front and center for people with some of the stuff you're doing. You mentioned the word passion, and I know your I think your URL is passion is sexy, which
That's
is a
right. Yep.
pretty awesome URL. You want to talk about that a little bit? What do you mean by that, and how does it sort of drive what you're doing with the work you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I kind of stumbled upon it like when I was trying to figure out how to brand myself. Because it's for a name that no one could pronounce, it's a surprisingly common name. So I couldn't just use my name for a handle or whatever. I had to kind of go more field.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things I was thinking about is like, uh, if people are really excited about it, like genuinely, like
Hmm.
I can get there with them, right? Like
Yeah.
I think that's kind of one of my favorite parts about this, where like you're like, wow, like that people really care about this thing, and then you talk to someone who's really passionate about it, you're like, oh damn, people really do care about this. Like this is like
Hmm.
a big deal for them. Like they really think about this, and like I think a lot of folks, when they're in that kind of a more of a niche passion area, they're
Hmm.
hesitant to kind of talk about it. They don't want to like overload on you. But like I'm like,
Yeah.
no, no, I want to pop this water balloon. I want the full like the thing for this. And I think people are drawn to it. Like even like for me, passion is sexy is like the way I kind of articulate it. But
Hmm.
I think everyone responds to that, right? When you see someone who's into a thing and you're like, it's infectious. So you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, this is really cool. Like I can get into it. I think we're seeing a lot
Hmm.
more of that now as like TikTok, especially social media
Hmm.
generally, but TikTok especially has been a lot more like people who have like a very niche point of view, like can share it in a very genuine way, and like they
Hmm.
find people who resonate with them, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. So yeah, I
Hmm.
think if you can tap into genuine passion, you can basically talk about anything as long as it's genuine and as long as you really feel it,
Yeah.
you can figure out how to get that across.
Yeah. It's interesting as you say that. I think I don't know if it's generational or what, but there has been times where it's almost like not cool to demonstrate
Yep,
how passionate you have to be super cool and
totally.
kind of cynical and like and it feels like younger generations maybe don't have that as much. It's like I'm just here expressing myself, and I do think that's a really important thing, and we should be encouraging and inviting it, especially in the world of advertising. Like if you genuinely care about being creative in whatever way you are creative, like I want to know that about you. Why wouldn't I want to know that? And yet there's always been like a little bit of like, I don't know, I'm too cool to hit for that or something like that. I don't know. What have you noticed in your experiences?
I think that that's I definitely had that experience, right? Like I
Mhm.
was definitely like a like a nerdy kid growing up. This feels like a cliche of like an origin story, but like I think everyone had I think the part of what has made this sort of moment feel like this for a lot of people, where you start discovering all this stuff, or people are like, oh, I used to be like a nerdy kid, not because we
Mhm.
all had that experience, but like we all had something we were like super into
Yeah.
that like, we just like and like our friends just didn't get it, and like so we felt like we couldn't talk to them about that. But now we're in a
Hmm.
space where like you can find those people, you find them online, you can find
Yeah.
that connection, and make all that real. And like I think people feel like they're finally able to be authentic in a way that they've not been able to be for like a lot of our lives. And
Hmm.
I don't know, I would get really excited, especially when I see younger people online who are like really excited about this thing and they just want to talk about it and make art
Hmm.
about it, or share like they're thinking about it.
Hmm.
There's definitely a more modern version of of what I think both of us experience kind of growing up. Like,
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day, like when I see people talk about like the ick, right? As I believe the kids say these days. And I think the version of that where it's like, I got the ick from this, and it's like, and they're
Yeah.
describing like long unchallenged behavioral thing that someone does that make people uncomfortable without recognizing it. And like I think
Mm.
that's worth like challenging. And when we do,
Yeah.
it opened up space for conversations. But
Hmm.
sometimes you see someone say like, "Oh, they did this and gave me the ick," and it's like that like they're describing like someone just genuinely sharing a thing and being
Hmm.
15 years old to like be able to process
Yeah.
a genuine sharing of a thing, and that gives them the ick. And
Hmm.
so I think that there's always a balance to this where it's like yeah, this language is really important for helping recognize how we create space for conversations to unfold, but sometimes it's just you and like it's just someone being passionate and you're not know how to respond to that. So
Yeah.
it's always a constant evolving process, but like I think that there's still a little bit of that pushback I see
Yeah.
sometimes, of people like, oh, don't overshare this. But
Hmm.
sometimes I find the right venue, right? Like find the right
Yeah.
venue to share it. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think that I definitely resonate with that though, is like sometimes you feel like you have to hide those things, but like no, we're in an age now where there's much more sharing and listening going on.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing. I think it ultimately should be a good thing for the ad business,
Mm.
because you're gonna nurture a lot more creative expression among people as they're growing up, and therefore when they show up and they're like, yeah, I want that job with that dental insurance, and wait, you've got room for this weird little thing that I'm able to do, like that's kind of cool. But we have to sort of set ourselves up to be open to that and be willing to, maybe change our definition of what we think of in terms of what it means to be creative or a creative in the ad business. I think it's been, one of the things that I've noticed is the ad industry, for all its creativity and innovation, it looks kind of the same in terms of how we work as it did, well before I even got started. And that's a really long time ago. So like I don't want to necessarily like knock it all down, but how do we find ways to evolve and be okay with changing and looking different in the face of both lots of new people coming up with different kinds of talents and different ways of being creative, and then kind of on the outside coming in, there's AI and all kinds of technological change, and just the world's crazy. Like, we need to be adaptable and changeable. How do you think we can move in that direction?
I think I mean, that's a huge piece to like unpack for it. One part of it that makes me think about this is I was thinking the other day too about like what makes a creative, and I don't think that it's like, oh, you're a really good writer, or, oh, you're an amazing art director, whatever. Like yeah, you have to build those skills as you go through your career. I think
Mm-hmm.
what makes someone or set them up to be a really good creative is being able to be vulnerable, and that comes to that
Mm.
genuineness and passion we're talking about before, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to be able to stand up in a room full of people and say, I believe in this thing and I feel this way about it, and be open to the fact that some of the people are not going to like that. They're going to think that you're dumb or that you're bad at what you're talking about, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's the more we can practice that vulnerability, the more we can tap into that genuineness, right? Because that's the biggest problem that AI has, is that it can't have a point of view. It can't do a genuine thing. It can only repurpose stuff that people have made
Mm-hmm.
previously. If we're
Yep.
going to keep advancing, if we're going to keep making things that people respond to and resonate with, it requires that vulnerability to stand up, be yourself authentically, and then be told that you're wrong. Like
Mm.
that's a hard place to be. I
Yeah.
think that's, and like when people you talk about like it's not really changed, most places still use the classic copyright art director duo. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's that is totally immutable, though it's surprisingly robust as like a molecule of creativity.
Yep.
But whenever I think people have tried to add in, like, oh, well, we do like it's a copywriter, an art director, and like a web developer or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
and people have tried this kind of thing in various
Yeah.
combinations over the years. And I think one, it's always harder the more people you add to something, but also if that copywriter and art director have practiced how to be vulnerable with each other, to share things that aren't, they're half baked or a quarter baked, and like be
Mm-hmm.
cool with that. If they bring in a third person who does not practice that skill,
Yep.
suddenly none of them can be open and vulnerable and tap into something
Agreed.
authentic or discover it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's what separates like, a really good like person who could be a really talented creative and who is one, is that practice, that vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and going with the A part of that too, like if people are like, oh, I want to just make this thing, you still have that point of view, you still have to make something. Oh, that's right. My thought with AI is that people are going to get savvy to it, right? Like you're going to
Mm-hmm.
start to recognize things that are polished in exactly that kind of AI way. People get better
Mm-hmm.
at tweaking it and that kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
people are going to are as AI becomes a bigger part of our lives, people only get more and more hungry for truth and passion and
Hmm.
genuineness.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think there'll be a lot of fuzzy areas where we're not sure what we're getting,
Right.
because I think that the fact of the matter is that, from a human creation perspective, not all of it is that good at getting to some deep truth and getting you
True.
to feel something, right? So there's probably this messy middle of, mediocre human creation and all of the AI stuff that it can kind of just live in a soup together, and it kind of doesn't matter where it comes from. And the hope is that it helps us really distill what is true and interesting, unique and creative, and we help to see the distinction more clearly. Oh, okay. Whether it's AI or human created, I don't want that. I don't want
I
stuff that isn't really speaking to something real, something deep, something meaningful. And so, but it's going to take a while, right? It's going to be messy for a little while. And coming back to your point about the writer art director duo, part of me wonders there. It's almost like the duo is what's sacred in many ways to me. Like
Mhm.
whether it's a writer and an art director, or whether you're defining what you do differently, meaning as technology comes in, like maybe you're no longer a writer, you're something different. I don't know what it is, but like it's some title we don't even know yet. I think like being open to like what skills we need people to have, and then still saying it's really cool when two people get together and can be vulnerable together, particularly because you mentioned the other part, right? At some point, somebody's going to tell you your idea is shit,
Yep.
right? But I think the beauty is in that two-person thing. One, maybe your partner might say, yeah, that idea is shit, but you have such a good relationship that you can go, yeah, I don't care. I want to talk about it. It's like, okay, fine. We'll still
Yeah.
talk about it. Like, all right, versus at some point you get to a creative director or an account person or a strategist who you ultimately have to let go of your idea at some point and be
Yes.
okay with that. And that's an interesting balance, sort of an emotional intelligence, I think, of
Yeah.
being able to be vulnerable enough to share the things that come out of you, and then having enough strength and resilience to not feel destroyed when that thing is rejected, right? How do
Yeah.
you how do you nurture that skill?
That's a great that's a great question because you're totally right. Like it is both of those pieces. You need the vulnerability and the resilience. That's what makes the creative. So I amend my earlier thought. It is that piece together.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people when they're starting out, they struggle to separate themselves from that vulnerable idea that they put forward, right? It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely went through that growing process. I'm sure you went through a very similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's what makes having like skilled teachers and mentors such a critical part of the process.
Yeah.
Not to coddle or not give real feedback, but to recognize that like, okay, this person needs to be to understand that this idea is not working and why, but also
Mm-hmm.
hear it in a way that helps them not only get better at thinking of better ideas, but get better at protecting themselves when other people are not willing to be thoughtful and patient with them. I
Mm-hmm.
come from a background as a swimming teacher. I spent a decade doing that, teach people to swim. And I think a lot of that is understanding that it comes in steps, right? This
Mm-hmm.
person's at this point in their process, and then this person, different point in their process. They might look the same or be the same age, but they're just at different points in that process. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that this is the same way. You introduce someone to this process step by step, so that they build that resilience, like step by step. Ideally, there's always fits and starts. Sometimes I know we've all had like the worst meeting of our lives at some point, and you learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
But part of handling those meetings where things do not go your way is having a bunch of skills that you build over time and with a lot of patience,
Mm-hmm.
both working on yourself and working with people who want to help you succeed at that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of just how we like, I think about like mentorship and growth, like helping people train that resilience a little bit at a time into the
Mm-hmm.
process is part of that. Feel out where they are, because I think it's the continuous building, right? It's like, okay, this was good enough last week. Now we're here. Now you have
Mm-hmm.
to bring this to me. Now you have to be able to defend this kind of thinking. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. This is a great week. That was last week now. This
Yeah.
week, here's the new standard. And if you move
Yeah.
it like increment by increment, it's crazy how much faster people get better than you expect. Like how
Mm-hmm.
quickly they acquire those skills if they have the will and the talent to keep building on it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, certainly in my experience. And I think, there's such a range of how people show up as creative leaders in this business. And, from the brutally toxic, like, taking your stuff and setting it on fire in the trash bin because it just pisses you off to like, oh, I like everything. It's like, it's all interesting and like, and being so wishy-washy that you're not able to actually give them that, like, what I would say is a gift of discernment. This
Yes.
is good because, and this is, there might be an interesting thought in here, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. And here's why. And I would suggest you focus on the one that's pretty interesting right now. And there'll be another day where you can revisit that thought. Trust me.
Yep.
And that's part of the art of creative leadership, which I think is interesting because it's not really taught. I mean, I don't think most of us get trained. So you kind of, I like that you mentioned your experience as a swimming instructor. It seems like that maybe started to inform the way you show up as a creative leader. And, one of the phrases, I don't think you used it just here, but it showed up as you said it, is the idea of meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's a great approach. The pushback that I think you'll get from people is, I can't meet people where they are because I've got a deadline at 4:00. How do you balance those things in our world?
I think that, I mean, I definitely feel that tension, right? As a creative leader, I have that in the back of my mind. It's like, we have a deadline, we're going to hit this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think meeting people where they are is so critical, partially because, again, like, they need to have time to build up to where you're going to be with that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
also partially because, like, if I just tell someone how I would do it or do it for them, then
Mm-hmm.
they will never surprise me, right?
Yeah.
I can't surprise myself. I can only have ideas that I can have. So if
Mm-hmm.
all I do is impress that thought onto them, then it's just extra hands that we're having do
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And that feels like a total waste, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want to be surprised at people who know about stuff that I don't know about, who
Mm-hmm.
can bring in perspectives I simply cannot possess.
Yeah.
And if you're willing halfway, you can draw those out of them, and you can get work that you could not have made on your own. So
Mm-hmm.
that investment is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
The confidence to say, in the back of your mind, I've got this deadline, I've got this client meeting, I've got this thing, that comes from your own internal strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's one of those things where it's like, okay, going back to the swimming analogy, are you a strong enough swimmer to close the gap alone?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's like, give the people you're teaching as much room and space as they can to get as far as they can, knowing that you have the confidence to say, like, I could do this whole project in 4 hours. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
take this person 2 weeks to do it, but I will make sure that when we get to that 4 hour mark with only 4 hours left, I'm either going to take it and run with it, or or they're going to finish it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires you to have a lot of confidence in your own ability to deliver at a high level consistently, which you have to just continue to build as a
Yeah.
creative, right? Being a leader is not a way to absent yourself from that process.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And and I think that if when that happens, because it's inevitable, there's always gonna be something where it's like, this person's trying their best and they're falling short, and knowing when to step in and when to do that, there's a valuable learning process in that too, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
give them as much room as they can to get this. But there's definitely a part of this where someone's like, oh, I was really excited about this project and I couldn't get it across the finish line, and Chris had to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Huh, what did I miss that I needed for this, right? And like, you
Yeah.
can do that in a way that leaves it open. If the person you're working with knows that you're rooting for them and pulling for them, then pulling away the project to the finish line yourself is not a matter of fear or lack of confidence in them. It's just like, huh, they should be clear to them already. Like, boy, Chris made every effort to get me there with this, and I couldn't get there. What do I need to do to keep pushing this along? Or how can I ask
Mm-hmm.
about how to solve that? And if you built that good rapport with that person through that process, when you get to that 11th hour moment and you just take in the ball and run with it, it should be clear, like, oh, we're gonna come back to this conversation to keep building on this.
Yeah.
But it's to be motivating. Like, I've had projects when I was coming up where it's like, damn it, I really wanted to do this cool thing, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't. I couldn't close the distance. Like, it makes, for me at least, it made me want to fight harder for my own
Yeah.
work. And if you structure it right, hopefully, a lot of people will feel the same way when you're in that space with them.
Yeah. And I think that maybe begs the question, like, how do you create the communication around that so that the creative understand that you're with them,
Mhm.
You're supporting them. You're going to give them every chance to get it across the finish line and be available to provide whatever support they need, and to let them be clear that if and when they get to that point where they have to kind of pass the baton, and it's like, listen, I'm gonna take this one across. How do you manage that in such a way that they're not sort of feeling defeated by that, but as you said, more, okay, I'm inspired to figure out what I could do next time to maybe get it across the finish line? What kind of communication things do you need to do there to make sure that they get that?
I think I think there's not one size fits all, but there is definitely some techniques that go into it, right? And I think it goes back to that teaching background where it's like being super clear at every step. All right, we're doing this now. That means you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And when you're done, we'll have done this. And then if you get to the end, you should be able to say like, okay, so I need you to do this and this, but you didn't do this. So now we're doing this, right? If you're communicating very clearly, very succinctly at every phase of the process, then it should be really obvious to everybody. And if it's not, then you need to go back and figure out like, okay, what did we miss? What did you not? I said this, this, and this. You weren't hearing all three of these things. What did we miss about that? It's a constant revision to make sure that we're still all getting that, but that clarity and directness. Because then if you get to that point where you're like, okay, like you did this, but you didn't do this and this. So now I'm going to do this, and I'm going to have this person do this and this, and you're going to go and you're going to focus on this now.
Right.
If you say that, if you structure it all the way through, ideally it shouldn't feel like, oh, well, like Chris is mad at me. Because I think that's the other part of it too, where it's like a teacher, when you're teaching, you being mad at people doesn't solve anything, right? I can't be mad at someone for being bad at breaststroke. That's not like a meaningful thing to do. And the same with creative. I get mad at somebody for not knowing as much as I do about creating a whole creative campaign or an elevated concept or a social concept or whatever, right? Like that's not being mad about that doesn't solve any. They won't get better, and I won't get what I wanted. So but if you keep that succinctness and clearness, then it should be really obvious. Like, oh, okay, like there's not even a matter of value or emotional judgment. It's purely like I can look at the paper and I was like, yep, I agree. I did this, but not this and this. Okay, all of this makes sense. And again, like that takes time, and not every person communicates in that same way. So you do have to have some back and forward to figure out how to communicate that, and it requires constant curiosity too. This is a small digression anecdote for swimming, but the classic thing is when you're teaching people to do flutter kick, which you use for freestyle and backstroke and stuff. You're supposed to keep your legs straight, so you're using your entire leg to propel your body. But little kids, when they're doing it, they love to bend their knees because it feels so big. It feels swingy and big, and there's big splashes. They feel fast, but it's not a useful technique for them. And no matter how many times you say to them, keep your legs straight, they physically can't. They don't have the motor skills to pick it up. They don't get it. And for years, I would try to do that. It's like, why isn't that sinking into them? And then one day I was like, okay, we're going to talk about it this way. So I had to show like their leg, and it's like, okay, which muscles are bigger? The ones down here or the ones up here? Like those are the bigger muscles. And then I would show them the splashing for this. And it's like, okay, like, so we're going to use our big muscles for this. And then suddenly once they knew, oh, I'm engaging my thigh muscle as opposed to like my calf muscle, suddenly it made sense to them. I was willing to go that extra thing to figure out what are they thinking about? How can I say this differently, as opposed to just repeating myself and being frustrated that they're not literally doing what I said, right? But I think that's incumbent on us, right? A 6-year-old doesn't know the history and technique of swimming at a high level. That's my job to know that. And I make that part of my job to get better at that.
Yeah, that's a great example of meeting someone where they are, right? It's like, what are they capable of receiving from me right now? Right. What will connect for them? And I think, that's a good, model in general. And I even wonder, as we're talking kind of on a project level about, okay, somebody is trying to figure out how to get better and hopefully get the project all the way to completion. Is there kind of a step back, even looking at a more kind of macro level of, every person on your team really understanding who they are, where they are, what they bring to the table, and then having those higher level conversations of like, here's what development is going to look like for you. Right. Right now you bring this to the table. You're very good at this. These are the things that we think will help you become even better. And I'm going to help you, get there, but you're going to need to do a lot of work, and we're going to have conversations around where you are. Are those conversations you like to have with folks on your team, kind of on that bigger picture level?
They are, and I love that you brought it up that way because you made a point earlier about like how we don't do a lot of training for how to actually do these sort of things, right? Like when you go to like a swimming class, going back to this and that, to my long distant past,
Yeah.
when you go to this thing, like you show up and it's like, okay, like you're at this level here, and here's all the things on the checklist for this level. If you do all in the checklist, move to the next level, right? Like a school is very structured in what skills we expect you to have, when we expect you to have them, and how we evaluate whether you have them.
Yeah.
Creativity is totally up in the air. Like, and I think a lot of people get frustrated. They're like, I've been doing this. I feel like I'm doing a great job, but I've been stuck at mid-level for like 2 years. Like, what do I need to do to get to that senior level?
Right.
That's a very fair question to ask. And, you know, being able to, and like, you know, it may not be quite so, but like buttoned up. The opportunities may not come in such an even way as like in the classroom setting, but people want the same thing. Students and parents, both for kids, both, or even just adult students, they want to know where they are in the process and where they're learning.
Yeah.
Professional creatives deserve that same level of attention. And
I
like,
agree.
so if I think the bare minimum is getting to say like, okay, we're gonna have a talk here, you know, on a recurring basis about what I'm seeing from you, what I expect from you, and then what the results of that expectation being met will mean for you. And I think that that's like, yeah, I think if you're doing that consistent communication, whenever I have like a performance review with somebody, right? Like my mind, there should be no surprises here. Like it should be a reinforcement of everything we talked about. If you're hearing bad news for the first time in that, it means I have messed up somewhere on the way in communicating what I expected and what you're at versus what you're actually doing. It should be very, very straightforward. But again, like we don't structure that. Agencies are not built with that idea in mind that you have to have done, you know, well, once you've done like 2 or 3 productions and like once you've sold this kind of campaign or whatever, like then you'll be able to start talking about senior kind of stuff. Because that's just not how we structure it. But I think the more we can get to that sense of very clear feedback and expectations, then the better off people are. But because we're not building as an industry, it's currently kind of incumbent on the individual creative leaders to build that structure for their team. So I do enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, I agree. It does tend to just fall on the individual leaders, which then comes back to the fact that most of us as leaders were not trained. And so do we even know to do that?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've experienced since I kind of left working in the ad world full time and became, more of a coach and working with folks in the business from that perspective, and then talking to folks in other businesses, we're shockingly inadequate when it comes to what you just talked about. Like, meaning so many other industries, the term that shows up in the world of coaching and in like HR is like benchmarking. Right. What does it mean to be a mid-level creative? What does it mean to be a senior level creative? What does it mean to be an ACD? There are places that do an okay job, but I think the best I ever saw was look at the job description. But then you look at the job description, and every job description I've ever seen is terrible. It's garbage. It's cut and paste nonsense from like 25 years ago that just kind of semi-evolves. Yeah. So there's not like a process. There's nobody paying attention to that. And therefore, you just kind of have to kind of figure it out on your own with the support of your manager. I think we could do much better at that. I think it could be like, this is legitimately the things you can do. Because otherwise, we have a lot of conversations around things like bias and that, that sort of like big picture cultural bias and all that kind of stuff. But I think even more just individual, I think I like that person a little better for whatever reason. Or for me, they're easier to work with. So I'm more inclined to want to maybe promote them versus objectively who's bringing what we need from an ACD or a senior creative. I don't pretend that any of us have the answers, but do you have any thoughts on how could we make that more integrated into the way agencies think?
That's really interesting because again, as I've gotten more involved in like just how agencies are structured, you can see where some of the pressures that drive the business conflict with these things, right? Like you want to be able to say like, okay, like you've done these projects and you're at this point, I think you should be a senior, like a senior writer or whatever, right? But you also know that senior writer comes with more resource allocation, right? It's like, okay, so we all agree you should be a senior writer, but is there revenue from the clients you're assigned to pay for that? And like in theory, the business should be growing with the skills, right? As we do more business, as we sell, as we give them better work, we should be able to monetize that with our clients. But sometimes there's lag time, or sometimes the other pressures for that. And like so, I think we've all had meetings like this. I definitely have, where it's like, yeah, we all agree that you're doing awesome, but like the powers that be have not approved like the money for your promotion for this, right? And like that's bad for individuals, because then you feel blind. You're kind of blind. You're like, well, I'm doing all the stuff I'm supposed to be doing. Where's the feedback for me to continue to build on those skills?
Yeah.
And then when you're an agency, it's also bad, because you're like, wow, we have these talented people. We've had them hired in. They're getting stronger and better every day. And if we don't do something about that, we're going to lose them, because someone else is going to have that slot for them, and they're going to be incentivized to leave for like a lot more money and the title and the opportunities that they have clearly earned here. We just aren't giving it to them.
Yeah.
I think that, and like, I don't have a magic bullet for that. One thing that I think about a lot, though, is that that's always a hard conversation that only gets more complicated when you add in the way holding companies are structured, because sometimes it's like you can look on a local level, and certain kind of agencies, you can just open the books and be like, here it is. Here's where revenue is. Here's our scope. Here's what we have. It's not working out. When you have a holding company, it's way more obtuse. It's way more abstract. And you might have managers who are like, I've been arguing for 9 months to get the promotion for you. And like an accountant somewhere in France just keeps rubber stamping it back down to us. And I can't do anything about that. And then you're, as a creative, you feel like not only I'm powerless, I feel like my boss is powerless too. Like, what are we even doing here?
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer for that because a lot of it is so institutional and structural that it's difficult for that. But I think that like, as a salve to that, there is something to be gained from communication, right? Like, at least knowing that you're on track for this. Someone's like, we can still do some of these things we're talking about, of like setting those benchmarks, and you'd be like to be able to say to someone like, hey, here's our quarterly kind of performance check-in. I agree you're hitting all of these benchmarks. I'm writing daily to this person to try and get this approved. At the very least, you're on a personal level, you're like, well, this sucks, but at least I know this person's advocating for me. At least I know that I'm on track. And I'm always amazed at how much motivation you can get out of just clear, direct communication about stuff, right? Like, we all want to be paid appropriately, but like just knowing that someone sees the work you're doing and recognizes that goes a long way in a lot of situations. It's not assault. You pay people what they're worth, please. That's not the takeaways that you can do. But like, definitely, you can get people to hold on for, if all you need to do to get someone to hold on another 3 months to get to that point where they're finally at the quarterly, like the fiscal year started, we're doing promotions. If all you need to do is just talk to them on a recurring basis, then that is part of your job, to like help them understand how that's coming together.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. I think it's maybe human nature. We tend to want to avoid the difficult conversations, and those feel like difficult conversations. So it's like, I'm just going to talk about other things, or just get into the work and talk about the work, but not talk about your needs as a human being in terms of getting paid more fairly and all that stuff. And like you said, I think it's actually not that complex. It's just, we feel disappointed as a creative leader, or as any leader. I think you feel like, I want to give you good news. I want to be able to say, you're getting promoted tomorrow and you're going to get an extra X $1,000 in your paycheck, as opposed to, it sucks to say, you deserve a promotion tomorrow. We're not going to know anything for 3 more months when the fiscal year starts again. And then, there'll be a chance, maybe that's the best news you could deliver. But as you said, people are much more savvy than we give them credit for. Totally. Like, even somebody who's pretty junior, who we think they don't know how the business runs, everybody kind of knows how the world works. They know that there's people who have the purse strings, and they ultimately make decisions about how they allocate that. And so if you say, we're doing the best we can, here's what I've done so far, here's what I'm waiting for, and here's when I can give you new news, people can go, yeah, that sucks, and I may still leave, but I feel better about where I am because they're being honest with me. And, that kind of, I want to zoom out of that whole conversation to something just more broadly. And this is not even advertising specific, although I feel it a lot there just because that's our world. The poor communication, I think, is sort of endemic to the industry. Again, another great irony that we're a communications business, but yet we don't really communicate well with each other. But more broadly than that, even, you know, what do you think currently is the state of our business in terms of what it's like to work in it? You know, I kind of often give people the idea of like, there's a suck meter, because my whole Desuckify work thing, like, is it maximum suck, or is it like, you know, actually pretty good? Like, where do you feel like we are right now?
I think, boy, that's a nuanced question. I'll speak to it as someone who has stepped into a new role that so far
Mhm.
I'm enjoying. I'll advocate for, I'll give them that for now.
Nice.
But one of the things I'll say is that when you're trying to find that new piece, it's been really frustrating to go through the process of trying to get people to recognize what you're bringing to the organization, right? I think we're in
Hmm.
a space right now where, as hiring is getting more complicated, or we try to bring in new tools, the
Hmm.
adjustment of how those tools impact stuff is not it's not quite dialed in yet. And I think that is adding quite a pretty moderate to severe amount of suck in a lot of cases, right?
Hmm.
I'm sure that your LinkedIn is as full as mine is of really talented freelancers who just cannot get onto the radar of a bunch of
Hmm.
places that,
Yeah.
even objectively, like this would be a good person to at least talk to about this role,
Hmm.
right? Like I know where they're coming from, right?
Yeah.
Even if they're not like a close friend, you're like, I've worked with them for like a month, like on a project we had. They would
Hmm.
be great for this. I don't know why
Yep.
they can't even get a conversation started about this.
Hmm.
And then I've started seeing also freelancers who are like, I have so many projects available to me. I need to farm out some of this work to other people. And then
Hmm.
they're almost acting as brokers for that to get those
Hmm.
people into the door. So
Yeah.
to me, that suggests that there is a huge inefficiency or a massive bias towards certain kinds of talent being brought in to discuss things and people who are not being brought in to discuss things. I
Yeah.
haven't seen, at least in the current age, any kind of particular correlation with like background or anything like that I can clearly point to. And it's like, well, this is
Yeah.
like a clear bias from the software or from these hiring
Hmm.
practices.
Yeah.
But if I see people who are like, I have more work than I could possibly ever do, and other people who are like, I haven't worked in like 9 months, like
Hmm.
there's clearly an efficiency problem in how we're portioning that kind of out.
Yeah.
And the longer that stays broken fundamentally, the
Hmm.
higher the attrition rate of really talented people is going to be from
Hmm.
doing that. And then you have all of a sudden you used to have an industry where people can be brought in quickly to solve problems. That fluid pool of people is going to start to evaporate, and we're going to
Yeah.
start to see it's bad right now for individuals. It's about to be bad for brands over the next few years, when
Hmm.
suddenly people who just could look at their current business problem and be like, I can knock this out in a week. That
Hmm.
person's not going to be in advertising anymore. They're going to be
Right.
gone.
Yeah. It's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's as an efficiency problem, and I think that's accurate. Of course, my brain immediately goes like, well, how do we fix that efficiency problem? Like,
Right.
I don't know how you fix it, but it's clear. Like, yeah, I've seen the people who are not worked for a year or 9 months or whatever, and I know they're good. I've talked to them before when I was working, and they were in the mix on some freelance stuff, and it's like, oh, your work is fantastic. Like,
Yeah.
no reason. And I think so much of it is in many ways, LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn for a number of things, but what I don't like, and I don't know the answer to this, but when freelance things come out now, it's a cattle call. It's
Yep.
recruiter shouts it out and with a post, and then there are 300 responses from either people saying pick me or pick my friend,
Yep.
and I can't imagine as a recruiter that's an efficient or easy way to do things. So you must be developing some shorthand to work through that, which is probably like immediately looking for who do I know, right? Oh, I know Susie. All right, she's at least on my list. And oh, I know Tim who recommended this guy, Larry. Okay, I'm going to talk to that person, which is human nature, understandable. But again, some people are never getting into that circle, right?
Yep.
Some people are never, and then it just repeats itself. Okay, I go to the people I
Yes.
know, and so I'm scooping this like top little layer every time, and there's so many good people below that layer that there has to be a better way to do it. Again, not going to pretend I know what it is,
Right.
but in general, I think it's a problem for the industry because we're clearly we're not allocating our resources well,
Right.
and that we're not exactly like in a position to be sloppy with how we allocate resources in business because it's not like advertising is booming, meaning we don't have crazy awesome profit margins. Like we're it's a semi-struggling business in many ways that's been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed over the years. If anything, we should be trying to figure out how we can make that flow of talent easy, really easy. Yeah. I don't have any thoughts, but I think
I know
it's out into the universe of,
right?
Of like, how can we, how do we improve this problem? And as what it means to be a creative starts to evolve, meaning we have all these new tools we talk about, it's going to be harder to quickly judge, like, is this person right? So you need a system for it. Again, I'm just putting it out to the universe. Like, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, Chris? I'm like,
no, same. I'm in the same boat. I will say though, the cattle call, I think, it's bad, but I think it's a symptom of the frustration going both ways. I think as people who are just like, we have so many tasks to do and we don't have people on it. And I don't have a good tool. And I imagine this recruiter of mine, I don't have a good tool for this. I'll just ask LinkedIn who it is. And then, but who do you get in that, right? It's whoever's on LinkedIn all the time. Right. And I actually don't think that I think the problem is there's no correlation between LinkedIn activity and quality of work. I'm not going to say like, oh, you should be writing whatever. Like, it's like, no, like, it's just, did this person happen to be scrolling at 2:35 p.m. and happen to see it before you got so many comments you couldn't possibly read all of them, right? And that has nothing to do with what your brand is, the project is, or any of that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, I'll see advice for recruiters where they say like, try to tailor your opening message to the project. But a lot of these cattle calls is just like, I need someone who's worked in fashion to do this for this day rate. And you're like, like, how could you possibly make an argument for yourself under those circumstances? So it's an inefficient problem that I don't think anyone has a good solution for executing on at this point. And and honestly, like there's plenty of stuff we could get into. Like, I love like all these kind of data kind of stuff, but like, if there's not a good way to allocate like creative talent to solving creative problems, then it doesn't really even matter how good you are as a writer or an art director, or how many years experience you have, or what's in your portfolio. Like, it's a too early in the funnel blockage to even try to even solve a later one, because we're all stuck up at this point here where we can't even get into the conversation. That's
a great point. I do think we are occasionally trying to solve the kind of after effect of it, and there are either recruiters trying to solve that, or platforms trying to set themselves up to be like a more sort of efficient way, but none of them quite do it, because effectively the redesign needs to happen within the agency and within the brands themselves to figure out how do we have a business model that actually appropriately cares about the talent that's working on the problems that we're trying to solve. And it's not currently doing that. So it's more of a rethinking the way an agency looks, and maybe that's an interesting thought too. I mean, if somebody said, hey, I'm going to give you a certain amount of money to set up a business that solves the problems that currently are in the front of people who are marketers or advertisers. If you were going to try to build that business from the ground up, how much would it look like an agency?
Probably not very much, honestly. Well, and so in some ways it would, but in other ways it would be very different. So I think when I think about like the business model itself, it's always weird to me when I see an agency, because I like there's a lot of things, almost everything the agency has loses money, right? Like the lease is a huge liability, especially we saw in COVID. It was a huge liability for a lot of agencies. Office furniture is a write-off. Computers depreciate. We don't even buy them. We lease them from management companies, right? And then we don't own any of the creative, so none of that, we can't monetize any of that other than what we sell for the work to hire for our scope. The only asset that the agency possesses that appreciates it all is creative talent. People practicing their skills, getting better at it over and over again. And going back to our earlier point about like, why don't we have benchmarks? Why don't we have structures? Why don't we have the conversations? A lot of agencies treat talent like overhead the same way they treat everything else, but it's literally the only asset they have that has any growth potential. Everything else is either flat or a loss. So a couple ways you could do that. I would love to structure an agency in a way that puts the idea of talent appreciating in value as a numerical truth as the core of the process. Here's our stable of creatives. We try to do everything we can to keep them for as long as possible and give them everything to succeed on these projects and make that I would make that the unique selling proposition. Like, this is an agency that grows with your business. The talent gets better with your business. We are constantly like working to cultivate that and grow this idea.
Mm.
I had in the back of my mind the idea of a you know, almost like a vineyard, right? The older the vines get, the better the grapes they produce. So I love the idea of like styling. If I was going to do a big novelty agency structure, I would like style myself as like a chief vintner or chief farmer or whatever, right? Because the farmer doesn't, like, you're trying to cultivate a system where you always produce high quality stuff, and it takes time and attention to do that.
Yeah.
You also could do an alternate. I will say I have a lot of conversations, and I'll name drop because this really comes out of a lot of his brainchild here. A really good friend, Roswell Saunders, and we talk a lot about how to structure this. And one thing that he put forward is the idea of, is there a way for us to start treating the creative as a appreciable monetization asset, right? Is there a way to structure it where, the agency owns the creative and they basically lease it to clients. And then you would structure it differently, where it's not like, okay, you're going to pay us this huge sum of money and then you get to have all the assets. And it's like, okay, we're going to create you a huge deal on our hours to make this kind of stuff, because part of our contract going forward will be that we own the creative and you lease it from us. And that way, if you change that way, when the new CMO starts after 26 months or whatever the current average tenure of a CMO is, it's like, okay, if you want to change agencies, you have to either they have to lease the creative idea from us, or they have to start all over again.
Yeah.
And that way you start to set a situation where it's like, okay, like, cool, can we be investing into the business, right? Because if you like what we're making and it's making you money, then it should work for both of us in a way that both the agency and the client are growing in that same way. So that's just one possible like brainchild of how to do that. But like, there's got to be another way to do this other than the work for hire thing that makes the creative a write-off every time we do it.
Yeah, it seems sort of bananas to me. I think both models you mentioned feel interesting to me, meaning putting people at the center and nurturing and growing the human capital side, or kind of more putting the work at the center and the creative at the center. And obviously that means the people who create it have certain value as well, but that becomes an appreciable asset as well. Either one of those feels like an interesting and better step forward from where we are now. And my hope is that there are people experimenting with this on kind of small scales and figuring it out. I'm sure they are. But I think it's just a conversation that should be much louder, because it seems obvious that the way we're doing it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So we'll just keep that conversation going the best we can. I want to kind of try to wrap things up. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. One of the things that I've been doing is having a guest ask the next guest a question. So I'm going to start by asking you a question from our previous guest. Wonderful. And our previous guest was Michelle Molitor, and she is a coach and also does things like deep work and things like hypnosis, really interesting kind of stuff. And so she looked at your tagline, your passion is sexy, and kind of looked at it through the lens of like, what's underneath that? And basically she was like, usually passion comes from some kind of pain in her life. So was there some kind of pain or unresolved something in your life that you think led you to develop a passion for creation and creativity?
Interesting. So if I don't know if I know that there is like a pain, but let's speculate. Let's just take that as a possibility, right? I think when I was younger, I think especially I a lot of as kids are younger, you figure out communication structures and strategies. And I was a pretty bright kid. I don't think it's bragging to say that I was relatively precocious. And I always, to me, it made sense that like being right or knowing what's going on would be how I would like find people to connect with. And when I was a kid, I was often stymied by the fact that being right didn't automatically make people like me or want me to be involved in the conversation, right? So I think finding ways to like understand what makes people, understanding the human, and then by corollary, just like people who were like seemed to have no idea what's going on, would just find people who were like always drawn to them somehow. And I was always fascinated by this piece. So I think as a general curiosity about like humanity and culture and just how we all fit together, like it was one of those things that some people kind of naturally find their space in. I really feel like I thought a lot about it. Like I thought a lot about like, well, what makes this person, they're wrong, but why does everyone agree with them? Like what is happening in this space, and being very cognizant of that. I think that helped me build a curiosity about people, a curiosity about like how we solve problems and how we do
Mm,
things that is maybe part of that. And then from the creativity side, okay, I want to talk about this, or I want to make this thing manifest here. How do I get people to help me do that? Right? How do I get people to see what I see and buy into that? And when you're a
hmm
creative kid who like says like lots of crazy imaginative kind of thoughts, like it's not linear how you express those things. So
Yeah.
figuring out the skill set for that was like a big part of me kind of growing up. So I guess if I'm looking for that kind of origin point, that would be it. Like
Mm.
I'm on the outside. How do I get in so I can make these cool things that I'm thinking about? How do I make that happen?
Yeah, I like that. I think sort of the word connection shows up for me, that a means of connection and connecting to others so that you can express yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah, very cool. Well, now we get to flip the script here and have you
sure.
ask a question for our next guest. Her name is Lauren Greif, and she's a coach, kind of a career coach for executives, helping people find work at those executive levels, but not through just sort of traditional channels. She has you kind of go to what she calls the hidden job market. Um,
Right.
so any
A very real
question,
thing.
any question? Yes. Any question for Lauren?
Yeah. So I saw in her profile she does a lot with like especially finding like more experienced candidates who were like or maybe like being ruled out for like ages and potential reasons, which I think goes along we were talking about earlier of like there's no efficient ways to sort through these things or like deal with the kind of pieces. But let's
Mm-hmm.
assume we're getting past like these first filters, right? Like if you have that connection, you can plug right into the people who can make the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with people who are decision makers is that if they make a choice that doesn't seem to make align with what they usually would say, there's something else going on there, right? So my
Mm-hmm.
question is there what are hiring managers thinking but not saying when they're talking about clients who are maybe older than they expected, or maybe come from a
Mm-hmm.
different background than they expected, or maybe have different skills than they expected? Like
Mm-hmm.
they'll say something that they know is acceptable or can't be challenged, but
Right.
what are they actually thinking when they
Mm.
say when they send that email full of like very bland sort of it's not you, it's us kind of things? What's
Yeah.
actually going on in their head, and how can
Yeah.
we start to help address that more directly in a way that gets candidates to show their best foot forward?
I love that. I think, yeah, it definitely connects back to being more transparent and more just that would make things more efficient if people knew actually
Totally.
what I need to do to get what I need, to whatever opportunity. Yeah.
Right.
Well, speaking of things that can make things better, if you could wave a magic wand and make the world of work, maybe particularly in the ad industry, more desuckified, what would you do?
Um, I think it kind of goes a little bit back. Actually, it's kind of a corollary to this question with the hiring managers. I think
Mm-hmm.
it would be about that transparency and deliberateness, right? I would wave a magic wand so that everyone would know how to communicate with the person they're talking to. I have a style of communication, they have a style of communication. We're not
Mm-hmm.
we're not gelling. And I think if like and like could we break that down? Could it be
Yeah.
like, I need this from you, and I can just speak and it comes out in a way that you understand exactly what that's going to be, and then you can
Mm-hmm.
deliver on it in a way that makes sense for both of us. But I think that's for a lot of that fear of like saying the wrong thing, or feeling like you're not sure like how like you're not like willing to go the extra mile to figure out how to talk to that person. That's underpins a lot of the things that, putting aside, like, I guess the other answer, well, that's what I would say on a day-to-day basis for like
Mm-hmm.
inside the industry. The
Yeah.
actual prop, as from the conversation, I'm now realizing my action magic wand is just like, can we just put everyone in the job that they're right for? Can we just get everyone gets to work, everyone gets into the job that suits them best? Like
Yeah.
that would be the magic wand. I think if everyone's where they fit, where they're able to put their skills to the use and feel respected and valued, like that solves like 90% of the stuff we're talking about here.
I agree. I think that would be pretty awesome. Yeah. 90+%. It feels like
I really think so.
so
Yeah.
much battle just to get there. Um, the last thing I always ask, I use a lot of sound effects in the show. I'm a cat guy, so you'll definitely hear cat sounds in every episode, but I mix in some others. And so far, most of the guests have contributed something as well. Do you have a sound effect for us that we can incorporate?
I would happily. I'm also a cat person. There's a couple of cats wandering around here somewhere. I think they're napping. They'll come be annoying in a minute. But
Excellent.
I always, when I think about like a sound effect, I was thinking about my old band director when he has like we have like a take of something that was just not working out, or he would like you try to read some music and it's like this is crazy. His always go to is just like woof. So I think that's my sound effect for you, just woof. More dog than cat, but I think I think there's an energy where sometimes you're just like there's nothing to say, you just got to just make a sound, and like
you just gotta like get the energy out, and it's I hear a little bit of exasperation, a little bit of like I don't know in that, a little bit of maybe judgment, like I'm not sure about what you just said.
I think I think I like that woof is almost like removed from judgment. It's more just like a visceral reaction for this, because I think this is my contact. Whenever I kind of do like. Well, okay, now what do we do? Like it lets you clear some of the decks and you can go right to it.
It's kind of like expelling the stuff through the exhaust pipe and just getting it out and then going, okay, now we can start fresh. Yeah,
exactly. Nothing to say, just get rid of it and go.
Awesome. Well, I know we're almost at the top of the hour here, but just last question. If anybody wants to connect with you or follow you, what's the best ways for people to stay in touch or on top of what you're doing?
Sure. Well, we talked about it. My handle everywhere is Passion is Sexy. It's all put together. I've used X in the past. I've kind of migrated to Blue Sky, but I'm at a point now where I just like to listen. I try to listen as much as I possibly can. So like I don't do a ton of posting or adding to things. A lot of times I think like, am I actually adding anything to this, or am I just talking? And like if I can, it's 9 out of 10 times it's like I don't got anything to add to this. I'm good. But yeah, Passion is Sexy, LinkedIn, X, Blue Sky, Instagram. But again, it'll be pretty quiet, a very listening kind of posture, but happy to hear from people if they want to reach out in those places.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. This was a really cool, far reaching, and we got into some good deep areas with this conversation. So thank you.
TJ, I appreciate making the space to have this conversation. This is fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Chris for being a thoughtful and thought-provoking guest. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider becoming a billionaire, colonizing Mars, and making sure every spacesuit comes pre-equipped with the full catalog of this podcast playing on a loop. You can follow Chris on LinkedIn and check out his site at passionissexy.com. His work is delightfully silly and, dare I say, thoughtful. Speaking of silly and thoughtful, you should check out my site and my Substack newsletter, where I take a lighthearted, cat-heavy look at leadership and personal development. Want some of that silly thoughtfulness all up in your face and shit? Well, let's set up a free half-hour strategy session. Bye, everyone.